I always was teased in middle school, like, do you have 6 toes? And so I just kind of got tired of that. And I said, with the Italian pronunciation, it's so much easier to get rid of that 6 toes thing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to announce that episode 250 will be the final episode of the Everything Band podcast. This show has been successful beyond my wildest dreams, and I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the listeners and guests that have been a part of the show over the years. There is nothing better than the band community, and I'm truly humbled that you found value in this show over the past 5+ years. I'd also like to thank Jake Walker and Austin Newman for working behind the scenes to bring the show to our listeners. Jake is responsible for all of the graphics and social media posts, while Austin is joining the show for this final run as our audio editor. I could not have finished this amazing project without them. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now my next guest, Sixto Montesinos. Hi, Sixto. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Good to be here.
So, Sixto, thanks for being on the show. You are the band director at St. Mary's University in California?
That's right. Yeah. So it's actually St. Mary's College. You know how Dartmouth College is called Dartmouth College, but it's a university. We're kind of in that same realm. It does function as a university, but it's retained the name college. So it's St. Mary's College of California. And I am the chair of the music department, the director of instrumental studies, and an assistant professor of music there.
So St. Mary's, I graduated from high school in Salinas, California, just a couple hours south of you. And when I was a senior in high school, I filled out one of those cards back when we filled those cards out to express interest in a school. And the trumpet teacher at the time in the late 80s recruited me a lot. She called me all the time. I didn't end up going to St. Mary's, but that was my first introduction to the school.
Yeah, well, that's nice that they were out there recruiting and stuff. And you know, we're certainly always recruiting, right? We're always trying to get our students, but I'm focusing a lot more on the private Catholic schools around the Bay. And I'm seeing, you know, where we're getting most of our students and what would be a best match, you know, for a transition from high school to college. So I've been making some really good connections and friends around the Bay with some of the band directors in those schools.
I saw you just work with Larry Colon.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we had a great time, and his school is actually like I could walk from my apartment to De La Salle High School, and so it works out so well, and they're sounding so good. I just really enjoyed listening to them, and they were playing such fun music too, which always helps, you know.
So my first teaching job was at Palma High School in Salinas, now known as the Palma School, and Catholic school. And I taught there for 4 years. And when I left, Larry was the person who was hired to take my place. So he was my successor.
Oh my gosh, it's such a small world.
All right, Sixto. So you're at St. Mary's College in California now. But let's talk about your origin story. How'd you get started in music?
Well, I started very early on. I was born in Mexico City, and you know, as you know, it's, you know, multicultural, you know, hub of art, and I mean, it's like New York or Paris or Buenos Aires. You know, there's so much music and art in that city. It's overwhelming. So I grew up there and started taking piano lessons at the age of 4 at the Yamaha Institute. And, my parents would take me to my piano class every weekend. We'd have our Christmas concert, and it was a lot of fun. And then, my parents would take me to all these classical music concerts in Mexico City to hear the UNAM Symphony Orchestra. Mexico, they have so many orchestras, and one of the conductors that was there at the time was Eduardo Mata, who later on became the music director of the Dallas Symphony, and then tragically passed away in a plane crash in '95. But I saw Mata conduct as a very young child, and just watching him conduct from the podium, I said, as a very young kid, I decided that I wanted to be a conductor one day. And so that's really what sparked my curiosity on like what that crazy person on the podium is doing. And so I've had that with me for many since I was very young. Coincidentally, now I'm actually in contact with his daughter, which is really cool, and we text a lot on WhatsApp, and I'm planning a trip down there to meet her and interview her, because one of my goals is to do some research on his life. So it's very cool. But then what happened in the mid-90s, my family decided that they wanted to move to the States. So we moved to Houston, and my mom was a bilingual teacher in the Houston Independent School District. And it's very hard we had a piano in Mexico, right? But like bringing a piano all the way from another country. So we ended up not having a piano in the apartment. And so I was really thirsty for a new musical outlet. So I went to middle school and started the flute. I was really fortunate that I was part of a very good middle school band in Texas, in the outskirts of Houston. I wouldn't say outskirts anymore, because it's Houston's grown so much now that you would say it's inside the Beltway in the inner city. But back then it was very suburb, and I was at Cook Middle School at Cypress Fairbanks ISD, and the band was amazing. The band director there, her name is Tyann Payne, and she had it going on. I mean, her top band was playing like transcriptions of Italian in Algiers. And we always played 2 grade 4s for contest. Prelude Siciliano on Rondo. I remember I played that flute solo in 7th grade. And then a really obscure piece, I don't know, maybe some of your listeners know it. It's the Calvin Custer Fantasia on a Triumphant Hymn. We played that, and that also made a big impact. So I've been exposed to this. That's when I not only learned how to play flute very well in the beginning flute class, but I started to like really thrive. And, because I was practicing, so I was kind of I've never been a very social person anyway. I really like to keep to myself. So I did just a lot of practicing, and with that helped me just get really good really fast. And I started getting first chair solos. And that was a wonderful experience. I learned in middle school from very early on about the band repertoire. We did the Rhodes Tres Danzas de Mexico my 8th grade year, and I played the piccolo solo. And I still remember all these things because they were so consequential. Like a lot of times time goes by, this was so many years ago, but I remember exactly what we played because the experience was so rich and fulfilling, and I'm always so grateful. So that was a great experience. And then after middle school, I went to the high school that was connected to that middle school, Jersey Village High School, also in Cy-Fair. And there it was a very similar situation. The director of bands there, his name is Dennis Kidwell, and he's a really great musician, and he's now retired. And the top band was also playing things like the Fiesta del Pacifico and the Persichetti Symphony, and Enigma Variations, and all these really Sorcerer's Apprentice, all these really difficult pieces, but they were doing it so well, and I was really a big part of that. He was really good at so many things, but the thing that he was, I think, the best at was he really focused on colors and textures and transparency in the wind ensemble, and always said, if you can't hear every part, it's not transparent enough, right? To have the tone quality of the band be very transparent. So he would make these recordings that were really, really beautiful to listen to, because you could really, they were so transparent. You do that through, really focusing on balance and giving very specific directions to players and sections as to, what you want to color, what instruments you want to color, what you want to not overpower, all this. So he was very meticulous about balance and creating those textures. And so his bands always sounded fabulous. So I learned a lot there. But on the other hand, I started going in the summers to a really amazing music summer festival that happens in Houston, and it's still happening now. They're very established, and it's called the American Festival for the Arts. And there I was exposed to the symphonic repertoire and what it was like to play in an orchestra. And I played principal flute in Tchaik 5 in 8th grade. And I was just like, I just really fell in love with that. So obviously Jersey Village didn't have, they had a marching band, they had a really wonderful wind ensemble, but they didn't have a symphony orchestra. It was like what they call full orchestra, but it was a very ad hoc thing where you would just put the orchestra and the band together. Like it was always like after school. So it was something that I think I was missing. So my junior year, I decided I wanted to transfer. And so I went to the High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Houston. That was another life-changing moment, because the orchestra there, the symphony orchestra, was really, really, really good. And it was because the director was really, really good. His name is Clifton Evans, and he teaches now at the University of Texas at Arlington as the director of orchestras there. And at the time he was there, he had just finished his doctorate at U of H, and he was conducting the orchestra. And we played things like the Rachmaninoff symphonic dances and Scheherazade and Enigma Variations. And I mean, just really Tchaik 6, things that were like really Brahms 4. And I got to play on all those things. And I really learned from him about how to, always come prepared to rehearsal, and he was like, you got to look at your parts beforehand and be professional. And it was more of a professional experience. Cliff ended up being my professor for conducting during my master's degree at UTA, University of Texas at Arlington. I was, I think, his second conducting student there. So I not only had him as a high school orchestra director, but also as a professor of conducting during my master's degree. So it was really, I can't underestimate like all the things I've liked from so many aspects. Also, another similar connection that I had was my junior year in high school. I studied at the Brevard Music Center in Brevard, North Carolina. And there I played in the band with Craig Allen Williams, who was, I think he still is, director of wind studies at Brevard. And he was my band director there, and I loved working with him. He was just such an engaging conductor and such a nice person and very inspiring. And he really stuck with me, throughout. So then when it was time to look for DMA schools, when I wanted to start my doctorate in wind conducting, I immediately thought about applying to Rutgers to study with him, because he was there and I already knew that I really liked him. And he and I have had, kept in touch every once in a while through email. And I emailed him and I said, I think I'm ready for my DMA. What do you think? Should I leave Texas and move to New Jersey? And he was like, yeah, well, come and audition, and so I went to Rutgers, and he ended up being my mentor and my professor of conducting there during my DMA. So those, I think, are the most influential, because I had them both in high school and then as a young professional getting in grad school, getting them as professors. So Craig and Cliff have been wonderful, and now they're obviously wonderful friends and colleagues, and they were all on my reference list when I was applying for jobs, and they were so nice, and talked to all the people when I applied to so many jobs. I'm sure they got so many calls from references, so they've really helped me out, and I really, really care about them.
Yeah, I mean, having mentors and having people you can trust in your corner is a huge part of your career. Cultivating those relationships, being kind to everyone, not being that jerk.
Absolutely. And I now I feel like because I had them as role models, and I still do, this is how I approach my students now too. It's just a cycle.
It is. So I'm going to go way back, and I'm going to ask this. I told you my first job was at a high school in California, in Salinas. There's a very large migrant population. And so I want to ask, because that town was very transitory, and I knew a lot of students who emigrated. And so how can band directors, or how can music teachers, how can we help those kids who are immigrants, who are coming to a new situation, maybe dealing with a new language and all the challenges that come with that, since you sort of lived that from the perspective?
Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you asked this question. I mean, this is so, yes, I was that kid. Totally was that kid. Oh my gosh. I mean, I experienced a lot of support, but I also experienced a lot of kind of ugly things when I was in middle school. I was put in an ESL classroom where the teacher that I had would forbid us to speak Spanish in the classroom. And if I catch you speaking Spanish, I'm going to put you behind this like curtain thing. You're not allowed to speak Spanish at all. Like, that was in the ESL classrooms. Other teachers were also not very accommodating. The only place where I really felt like that wasn't happening was the band hall. My band teacher, who was so kind and so accommodating, that perhaps, there was a little bit of a language barrier at first, but that we were learning an instrument together, and in a sense that's like learning a new language. I think just being aware, just being kind and being aware, it takes a lot of courage to leave a country and a culture and a family and just transplant over to suburban Texas, right? Where at the time, and it kind of still is in some ways, predominantly white, that it's a lot on the mental health of students, and you got to be very compassionate and very kind and really listen and just feel like give them a lot of support. And of course, that's on one end. And then on the other end is, what I've been talking about recently in conferences and things and initiatives that I've been a part of, is that you want to bring in composers and clinicians and guest artists into your band hall that look like this, like these students, right? Where these students can see themselves represented in them. I don't think I had great clinicians in middle school, right? We had this great band program, and clinicians were coming every week, and that was just part of the process. And they were all very good and very knowledgeable, but they were all white. It would have been nice to have a little bit more variety, and it would have been nice for me as a middle school student to have seen maybe a Mexican clinician come in with an accent, right? Maybe struggling to speak English, or as I was, but doing the thing, right? Being in front of a band and conducting, where I felt like I saw myself in this person and say, I can do that, right? Because when I saw Eduardo Mata in Mexico, right, very early on, I was like, I can, sure, like I saw myself represented in him. But then when I moved to the US, I started to doubt that because all I saw were clinicians that looked the same and talked the same. So I started saying, maybe this is not for a Mexican to do this. Like, what's going on, right? So in that sense, it's like, yes, kindness and support and all of that really helps. But I think you also just practices and in diversity and opening up the doors of your band halls to people of different ethnicities and backgrounds and colors and all of that, so that the students can really get some diversity and multicultural experience and see themselves represented.
It's interesting that you say that because, of course, you remembered Mata in Mexico City, so you had that experience of seeing. And anyone who has lived in this country and is honest with themselves knows that it's pretty ugly the way Hispanic or Latino immigrants are treated in this country. And so what if you were born here and you didn't have that experience in Mexico? Would you have had the courage then to dream of being a conductor without seeing one?
That's a good question. I think my connection with music is so strong, just innately and intrinsically, that I think I would have done it anyway. It's just so in me. I think, I would have done it anyway because of my love and passion for music, but it would have been a leap of faith, completely 100%, because I didn't really see a lot of representation of people that looked like me. And this is also not just Mexican, Latino, but also like LGBTQ representation too, right? I mean, that's also another thing. It's also important to bring that into, it's all about diversity, non-binary clinicians, things that, people that bring different things. So that's because your students are very diverse. There's a lot of diversity. So yeah, I think I would have done it anyway, but I think it would have been like a bigger leap of faith. It would have been a little bit easier to trust myself to do it if I had seen more representation in clinicians and guest conductors as I was navigating through middle school and high school.
It's interesting. I mean, I remember when I was in college and when it came to sexual orientation and gender, it was a different time. This was the late 80s, early 90s. And so it was more like we just don't talk about it. And now, of course, we have, people are very open about it. So we know when you have someone like Julie Giroux who's so open about it and it's central to her identity, I think it makes a big difference. It's that courage to kind of put it out there.
It makes a difference. And a lot of it is, you don't necessarily have to say, hey, look, I'm gay or something, but there are certain things that represent, that students can see in themselves represented in some of your mannerisms and the way that you speak, that you emphasize things when you speak. I have to tell you, in 2010, I did go to a conducting workshop, and a conducting workshop in Romania I went to. One of the participants, after I got off the podium, came up to me and said, you're doing okay, but I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I think you just look really gay on the podium. And I don't know if you want that. I don't know if that's something that will be helpful for you. I think maybe you, so in essence saying, you need to just butch up a little bit. And I was just like, I just took that and I was like, I'll think about, I'll see what happens. And then in another instance, I was doing another workshop at the Eastman School of Music, the Frederick Fennell Memorial Masterclass. And I was wearing these like purple corduroy like pants, like really stylish, like really cool. And I was really happy about it. And so then I was doing that and nothing happened. But then many years later, I was at Rutgers as a grad assistant, my first day as the graduate conductor, and one of the clarinet players that had been at Eastman before, and she was playing in the Eastman Wind Ensemble when I was conducting it at the workshop, came up to me and she said, "Oh, I know you. I've seen you somewhere." And I'm like, "Where?" And she's like, "Oh, you were that guy. You were that guy at the Eastman conducting workshop with the gay purple pants." I said, "I'm sorry." I don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. And then now that I think about it, I'm like, why did I say I don't do it anymore? Like, who cares? Right? Why did I respond that way? It's like, no, it's fine. If I want to wear purple pants to conduct the Eastman Wind Ensemble at a workshop, like, I should be able to do that and still be respected. Right. So that's the kind of thing where, and I think it'd be really cool. Like, if you went to a high school clinic or a middle school clinic and you were not trying to hide those things about yourself, and that the kids who are, trying to figure out who they are, and maybe they're non-binary, maybe they like to dress differently, and then they see a clinician who comes in who's a very good conductor and a very good musician and someone who has a lot to offer, but just happens to be wearing purple corduroy pants, then that might make a difference for these students and give them confidence to grow up and follow their dreams, right? So it's something that I also think it's important that, for to support the diverse groups of students that we have now, to not shy away from people that can come into your spaces, that can bring a lot of inspiration to your students, and in just by being their fabulous selves.
Well, I think we deflect sometimes. We say things when we're in situations where someone says something unexpected. I know I've done that too, where I said, "Why did I say that?"
But I said, I don't do that anymore. And it was true. Like, I mean, I really, I just usually just wear all black. But now if I want to do if I want to do an honor band or something, like, why I could wear something fun. Why not?
Yeah. So this is, it's amazing how much has changed. Or maybe I'm just lucky where I teach. I teach at a small Jewish community school now, and it's super open and progressive and forward thinking. And I have a student who's a trombone player. He was born biologically a girl, and so all the things that are going on in Missouri right now with the legislator trying to take away trans rights and care for kids. His father's a rabbi and his mother's a rabbi, and they and another family at the school with a trans kid, they're like fighting in Springfield. They go up every week to speak in front of the legislature. And so they've been featured in the New York Times and the Washington Post recently. And so it's amazing from my perspective to watch this young person. He's so smart. He's so caring. He's just an amazing kid. And you think, man, he's just such an example for his peers and the adults even around him. It's nice to see that come into the public and not have him be suppressed and depressed and put down for what he is. So I think things are changing. But again, I'm in a place where maybe we're a little ahead of the curve.
It's definitely not the same everywhere. Obviously, here in California, it's very progressive. But in other places, they're like pronouns. Like, why do I have to do that?
The other thing I wanted to talk about, and so there's a couple of intersections here. And of course, you mentioned growing up gay as an immigrant. You also played the flute. And I've done a little bit of the reading into the gender identities of instruments and how, we want girls to play, more brass instruments and percussion. And that was the initial focus. But what comes out of that research, it's actually just as tough on the boys who are playing what are identified as feminine instruments as well. And so there's another intersection you probably had to face as a young musician. What do we do again as band directors to encourage kids to play whatever instrument they want?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's tough because kids will gravitate towards what they see in the majority, right? So like when you have all these beginning band drives and you have all in a cafeteria, you have all the instrument stations, and then the students go around and try all the different instruments. That, more of the girls will gravitate towards the flute, more of the guys will gravitate towards the tuba. I think, once again, it comes down to role modeling, and if you want more flute players in your band that are male or male identified, so to speak, that maybe for your beginning band drive, have a male flutist there who's playing and showing the flute. Maybe your private lesson teacher is a guy that plays the flute, or have a private lesson teacher for tuba who is a woman, or trombone, so maybe kind of try to counterbalance that in the modeling aspects of things with professionals that you're working with, so that students can see that, oh, well, I can be like, if we have a female tuba teacher at so-and-so middle school, like, sure, okay, we can have more, you know what I mean? It's just, I don't think it's like something that you have to like force, like, but I think organically strategically through maybe the people that you surround your team with and compose your team with, you can make those changes by just leading by example, I guess.
And showing them that it's okay to be a little different, and, I'm going to support you.
It's okay. Yeah, definitely.
If you really want my listeners to blow their minds, think about this. The flutes are overwhelmingly played by female students in schools. But if you look at professional orchestras, the majority of professional players are male.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, and I see that. I can tell you, when I was, once again, back in high school, we would always take field trips to the University of Houston Wind Ensemble concerts. In my middle school and high school band, I was the only guy playing the flute. And it felt weird. But when I went to U of H and I saw that the principal flute of the wind ensemble was a guy, I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he's really good. And so that also made a big impact on me. Like, it gave me a boost. It gave me a confidence that even though I was the only guy in the entire band program playing the flute, that, well, the principal flute of the University of Houston Wind Ensemble is a guy, and he's really, really good. So, and he was the only guy. So I could see myself identified in that, and that gave me confidence to go on and to continue.
Sixto, you're like an intersectional dream here. I can go through all kinds of things.
I have had you're right. I have had a lot of intersections. It's a blessing, but it's also been a curse at some points. Because I have a master's degree in orchestral conducting, and then I have a DMA in wind conducting. But because I had a master's degree in orchestral conducting, it was very hard for me to get my first band director job, because people didn't know you went to U of H for music ed. So we know you could teach band, but why did you get a master's degree in orchestral conducting if you're applying for an assistant band director job at so-and-so high school to teach marching band? It took a long time for me to get my first band director job in a high school, because people were very confused. I had so many intersections. Thankfully, now I'm in a job where it's director of instrumental studies. So I have a mix of orchestra and band. I do. It's everything. It's all instruments. So it's a really good fit.
So, Sixto, I want to just get back and clean up the beginning of your or the end of your origin story. So you talked about going through high school, and then where was your undergrad?
My undergrad was at the University of Houston.
Did you say that?
Yeah. I don't think I did. I think I maybe in passing, but not like very explicitly.
Were you there with Lizzo?
I was. I was. She was in the marching band with me. Yes, she was.
Tell her I want to interview for Everything Band. That would be awesome.
Wouldn't that be cool? some people just reach the stratosphere and they have a million assistants underneath. It's just so impossible to get a hold of them. The only thing I have to say about Lizzo is that what she says in her HBO documentary about the fact that she felt because she was Black that people didn't take her seriously as a flutist and they didn't think that she could be really good at the flute. That is very true. And it's very unfortunate and very sad. But I have to tell you, I was there. I lived it. I saw it. And it's very sad that that is the way that it was. And it shouldn't have been that way because obviously she's proved everybody wrong. But she's right because she felt that people didn't believe in her. She said, because I was, I didn't look like everybody else that played the flute, that I couldn't be a really good flutist. There were certainly people that would say behind her back, like, oh, she's not serious about it. And she was going through a lot of issues. She was living in her car. She was missing a lot of band practices and things like that. So people didn't really take her seriously, but you never know. And so what I learned from that is that now I never underestimate any of my students for anything, right? So like I have someone in front of me who is really struggling in cello or something, but I will never say, oh, you're never gonna make it or you're never gonna amount to anything, because life really can take a turn and people can prove you wrong. So I just now believe on everybody.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. When I was in music school, it always seemed like everyone was looking to weed people out rather than grow people. There was always looking for excuses to say why you weren't going to make it. I don't know how many people told me I wasn't going to make it in music. And I imagine then when you add race into it, then that just becomes just another reason why you're not going to make it.
That is true. People can get very, I don't want to say jealous, but threatened, or I don't know. There's a place for everybody. You know what I mean? Like there's no reason to discourage anybody. I don't discourage any of my, obviously I don't discourage any of my students. And when somebody comes, I used to be like, music ed is a very viable option to, and I would be kind of like, performance is a little bit more challenging. But now I don't discourage anybody from doing performance degrees. Like I'm like, you know what, life is short. You want to do a performance degree and this is what makes you happy, then go for it. And you never know what's going to happen. And that was something that would happen a lot when I was growing up in Texas, because it has such a successful band culture. People would say, don't do performance. That it's a hard life. You're never going to get a job with benefits. And I would hear it all the time from band directors telling their students that. And now I'm thinking, well, life is short. It really is. Life is short. Like students should, if that's what they want, if they want to play the flute professionally and you shouldn't discourage them, and you have no business telling them. I mean, you can advise, right? I mean, you can say it is challenging, right? I mean, you have to practice a lot if you want to be the principal flute of St. Louis Symphony, or, you can give them those realistic expectations, but never discourage them to follow their dreams.
All right, Sixto. So we know you went to Rutgers, and I actually met you at EMF.
That's right. The Eastern Music Festival that takes place in Greensboro, North Carolina, every summer. A really high-level, prestigious music festival. I would compare it to like Tanglewood, right? I mean, they're very up there in quality. And Gerard Schwartz is the music director, who's a superstar. It was a really great job for me because it was a summer job. And when you leave full-time teaching as a band director in Texas to go to get a doctorate at Rutgers in New Jersey, in the tri-state area, were really expensive. Finances were challenging. So I had to find a way to sustain myself through the summer, because my assistantship was, I got my last paycheck for my graduate assistantship in like May. So it's like, then what do I do for the summer? So this job as I was first the associate dean of students there, and then Chris Williams, the executive director, was looking for an assistant and executive assistant, and then he took me away from the dean of students and made him his executive assistant for 2 summers. So it was a great summer job for a graduate student. I still have a great relationship with him, and actually just this past month, I sat at the EMF booth at TMEA and talked to Chris for like hours.
Yeah, my wife, we first went to EMF. She's a faculty cellist in 2004. And with the exception of 2 years, we've been there every summer since. Oh, three years because we lost COVID year.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's so nice. And the faculty orchestra is so good.
It's the highlight of definitely her performing season.
Yeah, it's great.
Probably not appropriate to this, but we can tie it into band directing, and we can talk about maybe how we can encourage students to do summer music things, whether they're big festivals like EMF or Tanglewood or Brevard, or even smaller local music festivals that they can play and keep engaged during the summer.
Oh, there's so many of them. And, being connected with your local universities and colleges, if you don't want to travel too far away from your immediate area, that a lot of them have summer programs that you can go to, that students can go to, and reach out to those faculty members at your local state school or private college or whatever it is, and just be like, hey, do you have anything going on over the summer? There's so many great. Flute Fire is one of them that happens over the summer and started in Houston, and now they have all kinds of satellites all over the place. And of course, like all the universities have like these summer band camps too, that are really, really fun to just continue. It's so important because the summer can really kind of make you or break you as a player. If you just put your instrument away and don't play the entire summer and come back, you've probably taken a step back. On the other hand, if you go and you use the summer as a way to continue your instrument practice, you have so much time to practice and get better that it can be the opposite. You can really skyrocket and like really make a huge progress over a summer. I loved my summer programs. I did like American Festival of the Arts when I was younger, and it was music from 8 a.m. to like 7 p.m. We had orchestra in the morning, and then we had a lunch, and then we had chamber music, and then we had a master class and a private lesson, and it's just like nonstop music all day long.
I only did like week-long programs as in high school because I didn't come from a family. My family were teachers, so we didn't have a lot of income to send me to big places. But even those, I went to I think it was the Virginia Music Camp one summer, and even just doing that, like a week orchestra festival, got to play, Beethoven 5 and Troika from Prokofiev and the Lieutenant Kiji and little things like that. You remember that because it's music you don't normally get to do as a band student,
Oh, you totally remember that. The summer is such a special time, and I still remember all the pieces that I played at Summer Festival because they just stick with you. It's highly recommended.
All right, Sixto. So far, I'm really enjoying our conversation. And one of the things, since we met at EMF, and then when I saw you got the job at St. Mary's, one of the things that I know you're doing and presenting is about Mexican music in the band hall or the band room. So if you can just tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are and what we need to be looking out for as band directors.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a little bit of context. Obviously, when you are getting a DMA, you have to do a dissertation. It took me a while to come up with a topic that I felt connected with, and I felt like I could have, enough resources to answer the research question. I ended up writing about the evolution of bands, concert bands in particular, in Mexico from 1810 to 1910, and I had to give it a date. I had to give it a range, right? Because you can't. It could be so much. So I just particularly focused on those 100 years. And so I started doing a lot of research on how bands in Mexico evolved throughout those 100 years, what happened. So it ended up being a really interesting project. From there, I was like, wow, there's so much here. I could literally just continue to do more projects and more projects. And then I think right before the pandemic, I submitted a clinic to the Midwest Clinic called Surpassing La Cucaracha and the Mexican Hat Dance, the importance of diversifying the instrumental music repertoire. And that got canceled because it was 2020. But then I reapplied and then I got it and then I presented it in 2021. And so from there, my colleague Brian Messier, who is the director of bands at Dartmouth College, reached out to me and said, hey, I saw that you did this presentation at Midwest and I'm just really interested in what is all this is about. So he was already on his side working on something called the Mexican Repertoire Initiative. He started a competition with his wind ensemble at Dartmouth specifically for Mexican composers to write music for band. And so he got all these submissions from Mexican composers for this competition. And the first place winner was a piece called Cumbia Moderna by Rodrigo Martinez. And so from that contest, then he started the Mexican Repertoire Initiative, which is just a way to support Mexican composers to write for band. In a nutshell, we need more of them, right? So anyway, he reached out to me and we've been working together ever since. The point is that Mexico right now doesn't have a very robust body of original compositions for band, in contrast to maybe other Latin American countries like Colombia, right, or Venezuela. Peru even has some, where we really want more composers to write for band. When you think about Mexico City being one of the largest cities in the world, right, and just the potential that there is there for music, why don't we have so much of them? And it's because it's a different world down there. There are bands, but a lot of them are municipal bands. They don't have the school culture that we have here. So they don't have the money to commission a lot of bands, a lot of composers and things like that. So anyway, what we're trying to do with this is we're just really trying to create awareness of this lack of repertoire when it's very important, and especially because the demographics of students in bands, and especially in states like border states like Texas and California, there really are becoming more than 50% Hispanic. Like, so we're having these band directors that have bands that are majority of Hispanic students, and yet they're not playing music by any Mexican composers.
I almost look at it in some ways, it's, when we look at sort of American culture, and you can't disentangle much of our popular culture without the story of African American influence into our culture. And going back, you also can't disentangle the Latin American influence in American culture either. And I think we're starting to maybe recognize those things a little bit more now.
Yeah, totally.
The initiative then is looking for more Mexican composers or composers of Mexican descent who are writing for the concert band. So are you reaching across the border and saying, hey, there's this whole school band movement here that needs music, or is it more just a broad encouragement?
No, we are. And, Brian really is the one that's really doing that so well. Dartmouth College is a place that is very blessed. They're very lucky they can really focus on these initiatives. So what Brian is doing is he's already been down in Mexico, and he's been guest conducting in Mexico, and he's taking the Dartmouth Wind Ensemble down for a tour this March, and then it's kind of an exchange thing with one of the bands, the band of the UNAM, Universidad Autónoma de México, down there. And so there's this exchange going on. And I know Brian can talk probably a little better about this than I can, but there's a course also that they've started down there to basically teach the processes of like what it's like to writing a grade 2 piece or a grade 3 piece for band because they don't know down there how to do that. And as a matter of fact, Nubia Jaime Don Juan, who's one of the composers we've been really supporting and encouraging, she's really wickedly talented. She's from Sonora, Mexico, and she's already written really great pieces for band. She just wrote a great 2-piece that's really cool. She said that was the hardest thing she's ever had to do. It took her forever, right? To be able to write a great 2-piece that has some substance and that has some significance, artistic significance, right? And that is true to who she is as a composer and all of that. But with all the limitations of, well, the trumpet really can't go above a certain note, or the clarinet can't really do this, or, the flutes really should not be double tonguing. To have those limitations, but still have something that's of quality. I think she was really saying how it was a big struggle, but like ultimately she came up with a piece that's really unique and really fun and really well written. So we're really excited about her work and all that is, that she's got coming up in the future.
It's really funny. I actually wrote a band piece during my doctorate right after I left high school band directing, which was great, which is still one of my pieces I'm proud of. But then after a couple years after my doctorate in composition, when I went back to writing band music, it took me a while. It took me 2 or 3 pieces that I just had to throw away before it was like, okay, yeah, all right, wait, because there's definitely an art to it. You have to kind of like reorient yourself to a different paradigm when you're writing for young band. All right, so I guess the question that I want to ask you, because it's always an issue, when is it appropriation and when is it okay to use a piece? And, everyone always brings up La Fiesta Mexicana, but how about like pieces from Mexico, like you did mention La Cucaracha, that might appear in beginning band books? What are we looking for as band directors to be sensitive to issues of appropriation?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I'm not so concerned about appropriation very much, as I think a lot of people are, and a lot of people are they're like a little careful, like, oh my gosh, I hope I'm not, I'm white, but I'm doing this piece, and maybe I shouldn't be because maybe I'm appropriate. I'm not super concerned about that. What I look for is more of just the piece that it is, the thematic part. So something I talk about in my lectures is the stereotypes that you hear in the music. For example, like this is something your listeners can do right now, is if you go to J.W. Pepper and you type in the word fiesta, and you just go to fiesta and then put band, concert band in the search, and then you'll see all these titles that are so silly, like Fiesta this and Fiesta Kitchen Fiesta and Trumpet Fiesta and Flute Fiesta and Fiestaval and it's so caricature, and it's so, there was even a piece, and I think it's been taken down now, but there was even a piece that somebody sent to me that was called Soft Tacos, and had a cover of like soft tacos, and it's like based on Mexican folks. And I was thinking, this is just like, wow. And I think they finally changed the name of that because they realized, maybe this is a little too caricature. I think when you cross that line to caricature, well, that's one of the things that I noticed when I moved here to the US, is that I came from Mexico City, which is one of the greatest cities in the world. It has so much culture. You don't even know. It's so overwhelming. And I was going to these concerts and art galleries, and my parents are very cultured and they have instilled that in me. And then when I came to United States, I realized that the students, the peers in middle school, their idea of Mexico and what it was completely different of what my idea of Mexico was. They thought Mexico was Taco Bell and Cancun, and you know what I mean. And my idea of Mexico was like this incredibly culturally advanced Diego Rivera murals and Eduardo Mata conducting. And so there's always been this clash there, and they're saying this is a huge misconception, and I see that. And so I have an entire hour lecture where I like explain why I think these stereotypes came about in the United States, in particular during the Good Neighbor policy era. But in general, about appropriation, it's like I don't really. It's more about just make sure you pick music that is not caricature, that it's not in that sense, right? And Fiesta Mexicana, and everybody always asks me about that because it's very well known. I think that actually that is a good one. I really do. Reed did such great research, was in Mexico. He actually went down there. That's another thing about, if you're worried about appropriation, take a trip to Mexico, but don't go to Cancun. Like, go to San Miguel de Allende, go to Guanajuato, go to Mexico City, like maybe go more to in the kind of the middle of the country. And something Reed did, and he wrote, and another thing I really like about Fiesta Mexicana is I like the slow movement, because it's very somber, and it's very different than what I think people associate Mexican music with now, which is like festivity and these trivial kind of lighthearted pieces about fiesta and party, which it's not a bad thing. I mean, obviously it's positive, but as long as it doesn't cross into caricature, that's where I draw the line, right? But I often think about Fiesta Mexicana, like, what if it had a different name, right? Like, what if it was like Mexican Emblems or something like that? And maybe it wouldn't have been as popular as La Fiesta Mexicana, but everybody relates fiesta with Mexico, and it's just a very interesting thing.
You bring up a lot of interesting points. You know, it's okay if you play a tango by someone who's not from Argentina. It's okay if Bill Evans was white, but he was a jazz musician. I mean, musical style, it can be embraced by anyone. It doesn't necessarily make the style appropriation. But when you cross that line into that stereotype, that caricature, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really strong point.
Mexican music belongs to humanity. It's not like, if you are from somewhere else and you want to write something that's based on Mexican music, folk music, or Mexican themed, and so, go for it, because it belongs to everyone. But make sure it's like respectful and it's not caricatured.
Absolutely. Sixto, let's get on to the final questions. So I ask these of everybody. They're big questions. I call it my enlightened round because there's nothing lightning about it. So how about, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I think I draw the line when it brings harm to others. So I'll give you a really specific example that may or may not be true. I'm just gonna put it out there. I'll say maybe I'm making it up, or maybe I'm not making it up. But let's say that you are a band director. I'll pick Texas because it's like one of the most competitive, cutthroat states. They have this thing called honor band where they have to record these pieces and they compete to see who the best band in Texas is, and then they get a concertimier and all of that. But which I think is all really cool and really great. But the question is like where I draw the line, right? Because competition can be something that's really helpful and beneficial and inspiring and moving your programs forward and all of that. But I draw the line when there's harm. So, for example, you are the band director of X high school who's probably the top 5 high school bands in Texas that is in the running for the honor band that particular year. You really, really want to win honor band. Like, you've never won honor band. Everybody says that you should have won honor band already because your band is so good. You know, you're doing music for Prague. The piccolo player has had the piccolo solo, since January, and has been working on that for so much with their private lesson teacher, and their heart is set on it, and just it's a big deal to them. But somehow they are sometimes struggling with the rhythm, or they crack a note. It's not always perfect, right? And when you're looking at recording these things for these competitions, they're always trying to strive for the most perfect recording, right? Because it's so cutthroat. And any little rhythm inconsistency or crack may make the difference between who wins and who doesn't. So you have that. But then 2 weeks before you were set to record for Honor Band, the first chair all-state piccolo player moves into your neighborhood and moves into your band. And now all of a sudden you have the best piccolo player in the state in your band. And so the band director says to the piccolo player that's currently playing the solo, I'm going to put you on the second flutes, and now I'm going to give this solo to so-and-so so that we can record for Honor Band, and so that I can have the best possible piccolo player for the recording. Now, that's really harsh, and that has caused a great amount of harm to this piccolo player that has already been working on this part, right? But the band director is so cutthroat that they will do anything it takes to get the best take and win. I don't think that's healthy. In my opinion, those kinds of decisions can cause a great deal of harm in the name of competition. And so, as opposed to saying, okay, you're new, I know you're the best piccolo player in the state, but we've already had so-and-so in this solo, and this is what we're doing. I'm going to put you, in the first flute section, second flute, whatever. And then you can be the backup in case something happens. You can be the understudy of the solo, right? But not taking away that. I always think about that. And the other example I have is, and this story may or may not be true. The other example I have is I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada, but
Parts of it.
Maybe some of your listeners have, I'm sure. And that's another instance where at the very end of the film, it turns out that, the Meryl Streep character, the head of this fashion empire, she demotes her first assistant for the second assistant because she feels like the second assistant is better than her, and causes a great deal of harm to this first assistant. And then the second assistant just decides to just walk away from the job because she's like, I don't know if I want to work in an environment that is causing harm to people based on just being the best. So when you lose your humanity in that way in the name of competition, I feel like that's where I draw the line.
I think that idea of not doing harm is definitely the most important part of it. And you gave a good example. And you sure that wasn't you?
I'm 100%. I can tell you all that I'm 100% that was not me.
I have a friend who wants to know.
No. I never. I played music for Prague in college, and I played the flute solo, and there was no honor band recording.
No. It's a good example. It's a good analogy. All right. The second question is, how do you find work-life balance in a career as a music teacher?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. But I do know that it's harder for some than others. It just really depends on your family life. And I admire so much my colleagues that have kids and families. And it's so hard, I'm sure, to manage all of that. I personally, right now, I don't have any kids. I have 2 cats, and they're enough. But I do have a wonderful partner who's very supportive, and he's also very busy as a professional harpist in the Bay Area, which gets a ton of work. So I am just very intentional about keeping things alive, like date night. We're in the Bay, so there's so many cool things to do around here. And just we can go hiking, we can go picnic, we can go to the symphony. So I try to be intentional about okay, let's take a look at our calendars and see if we can have this date when both of us are free, and try to do that. Another thing I do sometimes is making decisions. For example, he goes out to a lot of gigs, and for me, it's easy to work remotely. Just, as all I need is a laptop, and then I'm just knocking out all my emails and reading things and proposals or whatever. And I can do that anywhere. So I just go with him to gigs sometimes. And when he's, we ride in the car together. And then when when he's working, I'm working. I don't know if that's much of a balance between work and, but I think what I'm trying to get to is just about spending time together with the people that you care about, and you just kind of have to figure out ways that make it work, because we're both so busy all the time. But I just think being very intentional in keeping time for yourself, it's really important.
One of the things I often say on here, and so the listeners know, is that often I think as you progress through your career, it gets a little easier to find that balance. The early years are the hardest.
No, absolutely. I think it's also because you're so eager and so excited and so motivated to like
change the world.
Yeah, and move up in your career. And I think those are all really good things. But then you can neglect, like if you're in a really good relationship with someone and you're just got your first band director job and you're so excited and you just want to be in the band hall all the time, every day, all hours of the night. But what about, your partner?
Yeah, exactly.
That's also important, so it's harder. It's different for everybody. And I can't say that I'm the best at it, honestly. There's an ebb and flow, and I continue to I'm aware of it and I continue to make adjustments, because ultimately what matters are the relationships and the people you surround yourself with. Maybe you win honor band and you have your concert and everything, but if you come home after the concert, and you don't have anybody to share it with, then that's a little sad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. I've been there. I mean, basically, when I was a band director, I didn't really see any prospects for any sort of romantic relationships in my first couple of years. I didn't meet my wife till I left band directing and went to get my doctorate.
It's really hard. Yeah. I've seen couples that I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are so good together. But because either one or the other, or maybe both, are just so into their jobs that they break up. And I'm like, oh, that's such a shame, because I think you guys made such a good couple,
Okay, this is the big question, Sixto, and it's what are the challenges facing band and or music education, and how do we best meet them? And you could just pick one, because of course there are many.
There are many, yes. Well, first, I'm a pretty positive guy, so I always look at the glass half full, and I have to say that I think there's a lot of really good things happening. Obviously, this, I think that this podcast is a really good example of it. All the people that you've interviewed, all the amazing things that they've said and contributions that they've done, and there's so much for music head out there. There's so many dedicated, amazing teachers, and I just came back from TMEA. And once again, every time I go to San Antonio and go to that convention, I walk around and I say to myself, music education is not ever going to go away in Texas. This is really overwhelming. It's very strong, and there's so much going on there, and they're very lucky over there. The challenge is that it's not like that everywhere else. There's so much inconsistencies between, different regions of the country. It would be really cool if music ed was as strong as it is in states like Texas, if it was, in other places. And then furthermore, also just thinking globally too, same thing, Mexico and other countries, music education it's very different in very many different places. And I wish there was a little bit more consistency on the importance of it and the resources all across the board to have students more access to it. I think that's the challenge. I don't think when I was in middle school or high school, I ever had a zero period. I had early morning sectionals sometimes when we'd have to come before the first period bell and have sectionals. But in general, the classes were within the bell, the schedule, the regular day schedule, the beginning flute class, right? Texas has these homogeneous flute where it's just we just had one period for flute, and one period for double reeds and one period for trumpets. And it's a scheduling and an administrative thing. And of course, these programs are so good, right? There's a private lesson structure for private lesson teachers. They come in after school and teach. But then there's other places where bands have to rehearse at 7 a.m. or 6:50 a.m., for zero period. And I wish there was more consistency in the way that was happening all over we continue to battle that, mostly with administrations and just the way that structures are set with scheduling and things like that. So it's a battle. I don't know, like it's a really big thing to change, but that's something I see as a challenge, is that I just wish it was more consistent throughout the country.
My first job, my first year, there was no band program. I started it at Palma. And so my first year I was hired. Yeah, I had to have band before school. We started at 7:30 to 8, but we were 5 days a week, which was good. But then for me to be a full-time teacher, I also had to teach English and history.
When I was a band director in Texas, like I never had to teach English or history.
So I had to build up classes. So the next year we had jazz band starting at 7 and concert band at 7:30. And then I only had to teach 3 classes. Then I added a guitar elective and I was down to 2 classes. It's like,
so it's so different. And it's just, I wish it would, I mean, can you imagine how incredible it would be like if things were a little, things were more consistent throughout?
All right, Sixto, the next question is actually my favorite question of the interview. And that's, if I had invented a time machine and I can take you back to your high school graduation, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh my, okay. This is probably an answer that, I don't know, maybe you haven't heard before. So I would go back and I would tell myself, and I'm going to be very transparent, very honest here, very vulnerable, that I would tell myself to not be afraid to see a psychiatrist and get help for my mental health condition, for anxiety and depression. I think I waited too long to get these conditions treated. It's so long that it was like the third year of me teaching high school where I finally started to say, it's probably okay for me to go see a doctor and try to figure this out. Like, why am I so anxious? Why do I have these ups and downs all the time? Why do I come into work one day, I don't want to speak to anyone, and then the next day I'm very happy and in a great, like, there's something here that I think I can probably improve on. When I was younger, I thought that going to seek help for mental health was seen as a weakness or something that was something wrong with me or something. There's still this stigma in mental health, like there's something wrong. Like, why do I have to go to therapy? Because I'm not crazy, right? I mean, so when I was younger, I was walking around just undiagnosed with these conditions without any help. And I think that a lot of things would have gone a lot smoother and a lot easier for me if I have had that help through therapy and through medication. That a lot of circumstances would have been a lot easier to navigate if I hadn't been so, not afraid, but like ashamed of seeking treatment when I was a college student. And I think I would have liked to start this earlier, because it really has been a game changer. It's just like diabetes or, high blood pressure. It's mental illness is something that you want to treat as any other chronic condition and get help for. So I think that probably would be something that would have made my quality of life a lot easier when I was younger.
Yeah, I grew up in the era of suck it up, and I've been, one of the reasons, I'll be very public with this because people need to hear it. One of the reasons why this show hasn't had many episodes in the last 2 years is because I've had depression, very severe depression. And while it's under control, it really manifested itself during the pandemic, and, things sort of came to a head. I'm still struggling with it, but I probably had episodes when I was younger that I never knew really knew what was going on. And You know, you need to get help, and we need to stop telling people just to, be better. I hate these things where you get like on New Year's, oh, we're going to make a resolution to be happy this year. Well, it's not always that simple.
There is a stigma, and that's why, it's good in a public forum like, a podcast, to be transparent, to be honest, and say, hey, yeah, I'm dealing with this, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually been very beneficial.
So the next question is, if you had a choice, what would be the final work that you would conduct and why?
Well, I have a very specific one that I really love, and it's a really fun piece. I mean, of course, it would be fun to like conduct something very like substantial, like Maslanka 4 or something like that. Yeah. But I really connect with this piece by Oscar Navarro, and it's called Libertadores. And it's a really epic tone poem, and it takes you through all kinds of ups and downs. It's just a beautifully written piece, so engaging, so fun, and the ending is just so epic. I would conduct that. It was written as a band piece, so then after that there's an orchestra transcription.
Oh, it went backwards. That's unusual.
It was back because it was so good that they were like, well, let's make an orchestra transcription. And actually, I'm finally going to get to conduct it. Yay. This in December for the Awesome Orchestra Collective end of the year concert, we're going to put it on, and it's going to be the orchestra version. But I would totally conduct that piece. It just brings me joy, and I think it does that to the audience as well.
Wow, Oscar Navarro has 95 works for wind band, and I don't know him.
He does, and they're really cool. And Libertadores is probably my favorite one. It just has this epic ending where like these like drummers come in, and it's like offstage drummers, and the horns are playing these like really chorales, and it's just like, oh my God, it just really gets to you. It's really fun.
Sixto, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Yeah, sure. So I have some Bay Area specific things, but I'll start with one that's not. It's an event that is going to happen in Houston, actually, at the University of Houston. And it's called the Music Mexico Symposium. It's going to happen at the Moore School of Music from the 18th of May to the 20th of May. And this is in connection with the Dartmouth Mexican Repertoire Initiative. But this is going to, we're going to be focusing on premieres. I think the University of Houston Wind Ensemble is going to play. I think All City Band's going to play some music. I think we have a guest middle school band from the area that's also going to play. And it's going to be music just focusing on the music repertoire for band for Mexican composers. And I'm probably also going to be, I might do some guest conducting, and also I'm going to give a lecture. I'm not really 100% sure what the topic is going to be yet, but I'll definitely be there as a guest lecturer. That would be really cool. And as of right now, I don't think we have an admission fee to the symposium. So if you just Google the Dartmouth Mexican Repertoire Initiative, you will be able to get to all this information of where that is. And then some Bay Area specific things. Of course, if you're in the Bay Area, anything at St. Mary's. I'm really bad at giving out URLs because they're so complicated. But if you just Google like St. Mary's College of California music, you can check out like the jazz band concerts, concert ensemble, chamber players, but also our vocal program is really wonderful too. And they do such great choir concerts. We have a beautiful chapel, and they sing in there, and it sounds great. So we have all our events calendar there. And then the last thing is this summer, I'm going to be music directing the opera by Pepe Martinez called Cruzar la Cara de la Luna. And it's actually a mariachi opera. It's a really, it feels more kind of like a musical, like a play with music. It's all in Spanish, and the band is the mariachi band. It's going to be part of the West Edge Festival 2023 from July 22nd to August 13th at the Scottish Rite in Oakland. It's going to be a beautiful production. I really highly recommend it. And if you just Google West Edge Festival Oakland, you can get all the details.
Excellent. Sixto, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, there's two ways. Email is a great way. If you just email me at my school email, sfm5@stmarys-ca.edu. But I'm also really big on social media. I love to post and I love to share things. I'm on Instagram. It's Sixto F Montesinos Jr. on Instagram. And then on Facebook, if you just search my name, you'll find me there. I'm a chronic Facebook poster, I guess, unless I'm really busy, but I've had Facebook since 2004. I think I'm coming up to my 20th year anniversary on Facebook. It's really interesting. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but I think I love it more than I hate it because it's just a really good way to keep in touch and share cool things that are happening with all your friends and colleagues.
Sixto, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. This has been really, really fun.